The day the human engineering team received their new assignment, no one celebrated. They all stood in silence, staring at the huge metal object that rested in the middle of the docking bay. Calling it a ship felt like an insult to real ships everywhere. It looked like a broken storage container someone had found drifting in deep space. The outer panels were bent and scratched from years of neglect. The engines were so old that even the dust on them looked tired. Wires hung out like vines from every side, and half the hull was patched with mismatched colors, as if the previous owners had tried to fix it and then simply given up. The official who delivered it, a tall, thin alien with 4 eyes, spoke politely, but even they couldn't hide their disbelief. "This is the only vessel available for your unit," they said. "It is functional. Technically." The humans didn't argue. Arguing wouldn't change anything. They had always been given less than everyone else. In the Galactic Coalition, humans had a strange reputation. They were known as the species who could work with anything, the species that refused to quit, the species that somehow survived, even when the universe threw its worst at them. Because of that reputation, the Coalition rarely wasted new resources on them. They assumed humans didn't need them, and on most days, the humans agreed. But this ship, this was pushing it. One of the younger engineers whispered, "Did they pull this thing out of a scrapyard?" Another answered softly, "Scrapyard? This looks like the scrapyard rejected it." Their voices echoed around the bay, where other alien crews were busy with their own sleek, shining vessels. Some of those crews slowed down to look at the humans. A few tried to hide their laughs, but the smirks were clear enough. Humans were being given leftovers again. It was a familiar sight. Still, the human team didn't let the mockery bother them. Not much, at least. They gathered in front of the ship and studied it carefully. If they were angry or embarrassed, they hid it well. Most of them had been in worse situations before. They had seen broken machines, collapsing colonies, malfunctioning engines, and empty supply rooms. Challenges like this were not new. The team leaders stepped forward. They were older, calm, and serious, with a face shaped by years of hard work. For a long moment, they inspected the ship without saying a word. The crew waited, trusting their leader's judgment, because no matter how bad things looked, this person always found a way to turn problems into possibilities. Finally, the leader let out a slow breath. "Well," they said, "if this is what they gave us, then this is what we work with." No one cheered, but no one complained either. Complaining never fixed anything. What fixed things was effort, and the team had plenty of that. The leader walked around the ship, touching the panels gently, almost respectfully, as if greeting an old friend. "Let's not think of this as scrap," they said. "Let's think of it as potential." The word settled over the team like a small spark. Potential. Humans had always been good at seeing potential in things others had thrown away. Back on Earth, long before space travel, people had rebuilt cars from rust, houses from ruins, and tools from broken parts. They had survived harsh winters, dangerous oceans, and endless wars by turning scraps into something useful. It was part of human culture, part of their story. And now, on a distant outpost far from home, they would do it again. The first day of inspection was rough. The engineering team opened the main hatch, and the smell of old oil and burned circuits drifted out. The interior lights flickered weakly, and then died completely. The control room had cracked screens, missing buttons, and a chair that refused to stay upright. The engine room was worse. The primary engine wasn't just old. It was ancient. Some parts were so worn that the serial numbers had faded away. The backup systems were missing entirely. The reactor casing had rust in places rust wasn't supposed to exist. The humans stood quietly, absorbing the situation. It would take weeks just to make the ship safe, months to make it work. But even then, the leader didn't look discouraged. "Start listing everything that's broken," they said. Then list everything that can still be used, even if it's small. They knew the rule. You don't fix the whole ship at once. You fix one part, then the next, and the next. That was how big things were built piece by piece. The team split up into smaller groups. Some went to check the wiring. Others crawled under floors to inspect tubes and vents. A few started cataloging loose panels and spare components. They worked slowly but carefully, their steps echoing inside the hollow ship. Hours passed. The station lights dimmed to evening mode, and most alien crews left for the day. But the humans kept working. Not because they were forced to, but because once they accepted a challenge, they didn't like leaving it unfinished. One engineer wiped dust from a broken screen and called out, "Hey, the internal sensors might still work if we reroute the power." Another replied, "The navigation system is old, but it's not completely dead. Maybe we can update it with our portable unit." Someone else shouted from the back, "The coolant pipes are cracked, but the layout is good. With enough sealant, we can repair them." Little discoveries like this encouraged the team. The ship wasn't hopeless. It was simply forgotten, abandoned. It needed someone who cared. By the time they ended their day, the ship felt different. Still broken, still ugly, still far from functional, but no longer empty. The humans had given it attention, and in a strange way, it felt like the ship responded. Before leaving, the leader stood at the entrance, looking back at the dark interior. For a second, the leader imagined what the ship could become. Not what it was now, but what it might one day be. Something strong. Something fast. Something the galaxy wouldn't laugh at. As the team walked out of the dock, a group of alien engineers passed by, whispering to each other. Why are the humans wasting their time on that junk? They'll never get it working. It's impossible. The humans heard every word, but none of it bothered them, because humans had a simple truth. Impossible things were often the ones worth doing. The next day, the team returned with fresh energy. The leader gathered everyone and spoke in a steady voice. No one expects anything from this ship. They think it's just scrap. So let's surprise them. The humans nodded, not with excitement, but with determination. The kind that comes from deep inside, from a place that remembers every struggle they have survived. They began bringing in tools, old welding gear, portable lamps, scanners, spare wires, repair kits, and even items borrowed from unrelated workshops. Nothing matched, but it didn't matter. Humans didn't need perfect tools. They just needed tools that worked. The first job was cleaning. It took hours to scrape away rust, wipe off layers of dirt, and remove broken parts. They filled 3 large crates with junk that couldn't be saved. But every piece they removed made space for something better. By afternoon, the ship already looked slightly improved, not by appearance, but by atmosphere. It felt like a place where work was happening, not a place left to die. While the main team repaired the hull, 2 engineers discovered a power regulator wedged behind an unused panel. It was dusty and old, but not damaged. They held it up proudly. Look at this. We can use it for the engine tests later. Small victories like that mattered. Another team found that the ventilation system, although clogged, could still run with some cleaning. Someone else discovered a panel of unused wiring hidden behind the cockpit. Piece by piece, the humans uncovered parts of the ship that still had life in them. That night, as they stood outside before heading back to their living quarters, the leader spoke softly. This ship isn't just metal, they said. It's opportunity, and we're going to make it something none of them expect. No one replied, but everyone felt something shift inside them. Not hope, exactly. More like pride. The kind that grows slowly, built from effort and stubborn belief that the aliens might have given them scrap, but humans had never cared about starting points. What mattered was what they would turn it into. And deep down, every one of them sensed the same thing. This broken ship was about to become their greatest work. The next morning, the humans arrived before the station lights had fully brightened. Most alien teams were still asleep, but the humans were already unpacking tools and checking yesterday's notes. Their ship stood quietly in the docking bay, covered in fresh scratches from all the inspection work, but somehow it seemed less lifeless than before. Maybe it was just the way the humans looked at it, now not with disappointment, but with the kind of focus a builder has when starting something important. The team leader stepped inside first. The old metal floor groaned under their boots, as if greeting them. "All right," the leader said, clapping their hands once. "Today we begin real work." Everyone nodded. They didn't need a long speech. They all understood what lay ahead: long hours, tired muscles, aching backs, and countless problems to solve. But that was fine. Humans had never been afraid of hard work. The first major task was to map out the entire ship. Before they could fix anything, they had to understand every wire, tube, connector, bolt, and circuit. So the team split into groups again, each one taking a different section. 2 engineers went to the cockpit. It looked like someone had taken a hammer to the main panel and a laser to the screens. Half the controls didn't respond, and the navigation display flickered like a dying candle. But underneath all that damage, the original structure still held strong. One of them said, "If we can replace the wiring and patch the display, these controls might actually work." The other smiled a little. "If the controls work, the ship flies. One step at a time." Meanwhile, another group entered the engine room. This was the heart of the ship, and unfortunately, it was in the worst condition. Pipes were cracked, coils were burnt, and the engine core itself was sealed shut because the previous crew had abandoned all maintenance. The room smelled of old coolant and rust, but even here there were small signs of hope. The core casing had no fractures. The primary fuel chamber was dusty but intact, and a few tools left behind by some forgotten mechanic were still in good shape. One engineer ran a hand along the side of the engine. "This thing used to be powerful. It can be powerful again." Another laughed softly. "With enough work, anything can be." In another part of the ship, a small team inspected the hull from the inside. The external plates were uneven, and some areas had holes patched with weak materials. If the ship was ever hit in battle, even a weak blast could tear right through. "We'll have to replace half of these," one engineer said, "and reinforce the rest," another added. "Good thing reinforcement is something humans are very good at." The leader moved from group to group, checking progress, giving advice, and reminding everyone to take notes. Every small discovery mattered. Every loose bolt, every wire out of place, every hidden panel, they all had to be recorded. Hours passed. The station grew busy as more alien crews arrived. They walked by, glancing at the humans with confused expressions. Some looked amused, others seemed curious, and a few simply shook their heads. One alien murmured to another, "They're wasting their time. That ship will never fly." Another replied, "Humans don't know when to quit." If the humans heard them, they didn't show it. They were too busy working. By midday, the team gathered near the entrance of the ship to review their findings. They sat on crates, the air filled with the smell of metal and old coolant. The leader held a small tablet filled with notes. "All right," they began. "This ship is worse than we thought." A few team members laughed quietly. Everyone already knew that, but it's not impossible, the leader continued. The structure is solid where it matters. The engine core can be repaired. The systems can be rerouted. The hull can be reinforced. It's going to take a lot of time, but we can do it. Someone asked, "How long do you think it'll take?" The leader shrugged. as long as it needs. And that was enough. Humans didn't rush their work. They just kept moving until the job was done. After their short break, the real building began. The cockpit team removed broken panels, pulled out dead wiring, and carefully laid new circuits. They used parts salvaged from old storage units and pieces borrowed from the maintenance workshop. None of it matched perfectly, but with some adjustments, everything fit together. The engine room team opened the core casing and inspected the inner chamber. The parts were rusty, but many were reusable. They cleaned the metal with solution, filed rough edges, and replaced burnt coils with ones taken from dismantled mining equipment. Humans didn't care where a part came from, only whether it worked. One engineer said, "We're basically creating a hybrid engine." Another nodded. "A very strange hybrid engine, and probably the only one like it in the galaxy," the first replied with a grin. In the hull section, the team started welding new plates onto the weak areas. Sparks flew in the air as they fused metal together. Their gloves grew warm, their arms tired, but they kept going. Each weld made the ship a little stronger. Even the ventilation team was busy. They cleaned out vents filled with years of dust and dead wiring. At one point, they found a small creature nest inside one of the pipes. Thankfully, it was empty. One person joked, "At least the ship had tenants before us." Another added, "Rent-free tenants." The whole group laughed, and the sound echoed through the metal walls. Moments of humor made the tough work feel lighter. By late afternoon, the ship had changed noticeably. It was still a mess, but less of a hopeless one. New wiring ran along the cockpit walls. The engine room looked cleaner, with parts neatly arranged. The hull had a few shiny panels mixed with the older ones. Even the air inside felt easier to breathe. As the team stepped back to look at their progress, one of them said, "I think it's starting to look like a real ship." Another replied, "Not pretty, but real." And someone else added, "Pretty doesn't matter. Strong matters." The leader nodded. Strong is the goal. Before ending the day, they held a brief meeting. Everyone gathered outside the ship, sitting on portable stools and leaning against toolboxes. The station lights had shifted to evening mode again, painting the docking bay in a soft blue glow. The leader spoke slowly. "What we're doing here. Others don't understand it, but we're not building this ship to impress them. We're building it because we can. Because humans don't give up on things that look broken." Someone raised a hand. "Do you think the coalition will be surprised when they see what this becomes?" The leader's eyes softened. "I think they'll be more than surprised." A quiet pride settled over the group. Not loud, not boastful, just a steady feeling in their chest, the kind that comes from doing something meaningful. After packing up their tools, they walked out of the bay together. A group of aliens stood at the far side, whispering and watching them. The humans didn't pay attention. They had work to do tomorrow, and the day after, and probably many days after that. Once they reached the corridor, one of the younger crew members asked the leader softly, "Do you really think we can turn that scrap into a warship?" The leader paused, looked back at the docking bay, and then answered, "I don't just think we can. I know we will, because humans had always done the impossible, not through magic or luck, but through stubbornness and creativity. And so, with tired hands but strong hearts, the team ended another day of building. Every bolt tightened, every wire replaced, every piece cleaned brought them closer to something new, something powerful. They didn't know it yet, but that scrap ship was on its way to becoming the deadliest warship in the galaxy. The next few days felt like a blur of metal, sparks, tools, and tired hands. The humans barely noticed how much time passed. Every morning they arrived early, and every night they left long after other crews had gone home. The ship still looked like a mess from the outside, but inside, Something was happening slowly, quietly, and with a lot of stubborn effort. On the fourth morning, they faced their first major test, the engine ignition trial. It wasn't a full power-up, just a basic activation to see if the repairs were working. The team gathered in the engine room, standing around the patched-up machine they had spent days on. The leader held a small control pad. "This won't be perfect," they said. "It's just a test. If things go wrong, stay calm." Everyone nodded. No one expected the engine to start smoothly. It was old, unpredictable, and still missing several upgrades. But they had to know what worked and what didn't. The leader pressed the ignition command. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum vibrated through the floor, followed by a faint clicking sound. The core lights flickered, struggling to wake up after years of silence. One engineer whispered, "Come on, come on." Suddenly, the engine shuddered violently. A loud bang echoed across the room, and a burst of sparks shot out from a coil. On the left side, another engineer shouted, "Kill the power." The leader shut it down instantly. The room fell silent again, except for the faint crackling of hot metal cooling off. Everyone stared at the engine. Someone finally said, "Well, at least it moved." Despite the explosion, the mood wasn't sad. If anything, several team members smiled. Humans were strange like that. They didn't get discouraged by failure. They found excitement in it. "Now we know where the problem is," one person said. "Actually, we know 3 problems," another corrected. "And that's progress." Someone else added, "They spent the rest of the day studying the damage." The burst coil had overheated because the coolant system wasn't strong enough yet. A few wires had melted because the current was too high. And the stabilizer had jammed because no one expected it to wake up on the first try. The leader wrote everything down. "Every failure teaches us something," they said. "Failures make the ship stronger." And that became the team's new motto. They rebuilt the coolant system using parts taken from old mining machinery. They rewired half the engine panel, replacing worn-out cables with fresh lines. They took apart the stabilizer and cleaned every piece with care until it looked almost new by the next trial. The engine lasted a full 6 seconds. Before something overheated, the humans celebrated that like it was a victory. Other crews looked at them strangely, whispering to each other. Some pointed at the humans with amused expressions. A few shook their heads, saying things like, "Why bother?" Or, "They'll never finish that thing." But the humans didn't care. They liked proving people wrong. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, another set of challenges appeared. The navigation system refused to recognize input commands. The main display lagged behind every movement, and the pilot chair still refused to stay straight. It tilted to one side, no matter how many times they tightened the bolts. One engineer finally sighed and said, "Let's just build a new chair." Another replied, "If we're building one, let's make it better than the original." "Better means stronger," someone added. "Stronger means heavier." Another joked. They all laughed and got to work. They built the chair out of reinforced metal taken from disassembled cargo crates. It was heavier than necessary, but it felt solid. When they installed it, the whole cockpit seemed a little more stable. The navigation system required a different approach. They connected it to an old portable computer and rewrote the interface so it could read modern signals. It wasn't pretty. Some parts were held together with adhesive tape and spare clamps, but it worked. "Not perfect," one engineer said, "but predictable," the leader added. "Predictable is good." Meanwhile, in the hull section, the reinforcement work continued. The humans welded plate after plate, each one stronger than the last. They added support beams, tightened joints, and filled gaps with sealant that hardened like stone. By the end of the week, half the hull was completed. The ship looked strange, part old patched metal, part shiny reinforced steel, but it felt durable. The ventilation team also had its own struggles. Every time they fixed one pipe, another broke. Every time they cleaned one vent, dust fell out of another. At one point, they found a whole section blocked by a combination of wires, tools, and something that looked suspiciously like a broken food container. One of them laughed. "This ship has seen some weird things." Another person shook their head. "It's okay. We'll give it a new life." Every job, no matter how small, felt meaningful. A few days later, they attempted the third engine test. This time, the core activated with a smoother hum. The lights glowed brighter. The vibrations were steadier. It still shut down after a few seconds, but this time nothing exploded. The humans cheered quietly, clapping each other on the shoulders. The leader didn't smile much, but their eyes showed pride. "We're getting close," they said. "Very close." But the hardest part of the week was the full systems integration test. They needed to see how different parts of the ship worked together: engines, navigation, sensors, and internal power. When they powered everything on, the ship shook. Not violently, but enough to make everyone hold their breath. Lights flickered. Screens loaded slowly. The heating system turned on, even though no one had activated it. The sensors beeped non-stop. Then a loud grinding sound echoed from somewhere deep inside the ship. One engineer shouted, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" The leader shut down the entire system. When everything went silent, the humans looked at each other. "That was something," someone said. "Yeah," another replied. "Something confusing." They immediately got to work tracing the problem. It turned out that the internal power grid was too old to handle modern upgrades. The ship was trying to send too much power through parts that couldn't take it. The solution? Build a completely new power grid from scratch. It took 2 full days of pulling out old cables, installing new ones, sealing connections, and testing every line. By the time they finished, everyone was tired, sweaty, and covered in dust. But when they turned the system on again, the lights flickered for only 1 second and then stayed steady. The humans clapped loudly. A few even laughed with relief. "This is starting to feel like a real ship," someone said. "Not just a pile of metal," another added. "A stubborn pile of metal," someone corrected. Chuckling, the leader took a deep breath. "Every ship has a personality. This one just wants to test us first." They all agreed with that. By the end of part 3, the humans had faced dozens of failures, failed tests, broken wires, overheating engines. Stubborn systems, and each failure had made the ship stronger. The aliens on the station still watched them with confusion. Some thought the humans were wasting their time. Some thought they were crazy. A few were beginning to feel a tiny bit of respect, but the humans didn't work for approval. They worked because they believed the ship deserved a second chance. They believed they could turn scrap into something powerful. And deep down, every one of them felt the same thing. This ship was slowly waking up. It was learning. It was changing. And one day soon, it would surprise everyone. The old warship drifted quietly through the outer rim of the sector, its metal shell humming with the deep pulse of engines that were never meant to stay alive this long. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like a forgotten piece of scrap floating among lonely stars. And in many ways, that was exactly what it had once been. But now it carried a crew that refused to let it die, and their determination gave it a strange heartbeat of its own. Inside, the crew moved with more confidence than they ever had before. Life on the ship still felt rough, but the fear they used to live with had changed into something else, something like purpose. People who once complained about the cracked floors, flickering lights, and buzzing wires now touched those old surfaces with a kind of pride. The ship wasn't pretty, but it had become theirs. Every dent, every burn mark, every patched-up corner felt like a shared memory. like a bruise earned in a long fight. The captain sat at the central table in the briefing room, which was really just an old cargo platform they repurposed. He quietly studied the latest scans as the rest of the team gathered. They had been running non-stop missions, small ones, dangerous ones, and each time the ship survived, they trusted it a little more. He looked up when the engineer entered, wiping grease from his hands with a cloth that looked like it had seen better days. "Engines are stable," the engineer said. "Better than before, actually." The captain raised an eyebrow. "Better than before? How is that possible?" The engineer shrugged, smiling just a little. "We patched the central coolant line with that alloy sheet we found in the abandoned station. Turns out it's stronger than what the ship originally used. Sometimes the galaxy throws you gifts in weird shapes." A few of the crew laughed softly. It felt good to laugh inside a ship that used to feel like a metal coffin. But this meeting wasn't called for repairs or small victories. Everyone sensed that something bigger was coming, something that might test everything they had built. The pilot leaned forward, her expression serious. "The patrol from the enemy fleet crossed our mapping zone again. This time they stayed longer. It's like they're searching for something." "They're searching for us," the captain said. "And they're getting close." A quiet silence filled the room. Not fear, just wait. They all knew why the enemy wanted them. A small group turning a dead ship into a dangerous one was already unusual. But what they had done went beyond that. They had made something powerful, something the enemy couldn't understand. They had taken broken metal, leftover equipment, and forgotten parts, and turned them into a ship that kept outsmarting fully equipped fleets. It wasn't supposed to be possible, and that made them a threat. But what truly frightened the enemy wasn't the ship. It was the people inside it. The crew wasn't built from famous heroes or trained soldiers. Most were regular people who had been pushed aside, ignored, or underestimated. People who were told they weren't skilled enough, strong enough, or valuable enough. People who didn't fit neatly into the places the galaxy expected them to stay. And maybe that was the reason they fought so fiercely. They were tired of being treated like junk dot. The captain took a slow breath. "We have a decision to make. If they find us, they'll come with everything they have. We can run, keep hiding, or—" He didn't finish the sentence, because he didn't need to, or they could finally stop running. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then the communications officer, who rarely spoke in meetings, lifted her eyes from the table. "I don't want to hide anymore," she said softly. "I joined this crew thinking I'd be safe because no one cared about this ship. But now, I think we can do something real. Something that matters." The others nodded. The pilot tapped her fingers nervously, but didn't pull back from the idea. The engineer leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling like he was seeing the ship in his mind. They had come a long way. They had turned fear into courage and hopelessness into strength. Maybe this was the moment they were building toward all along. The captain finally stood. "Then we prepare. Not for running. Not for hiding. We prepare for a real fight." No one objected. The next days felt heavier, but also more alive. Everyone had tasks, and they moved quickly, fixing old circuits, strengthening shields, testing weapons, reorganizing routes. The ship seemed to sense their energy, or maybe it was just the sound of tools clanking and engines strengthening. But something in the air felt electric dot in the lower deck. 2 technicians worked on a sensor array that was older than all of them combined. It buzzed like an angry insect and flickered each time it scanned, but they didn't give up. "Do you think this will hold?" one asked. "It will," the other said. "It has to." In the cargo bay, the engineers supervised a group assembling new armor plates. They weren't perfect, and each one was shaped slightly differently, but when fused together, they formed a strange patchwork layer stronger than the original, even if it didn't look sleek or impressive. The ship was becoming a mosaic of survival. The pilot practiced new maneuvers in the simulator patterns no official pilot academy would approve, but ones perfectly suited for a ship that didn't behave like any other vessel. And the captain spent long hours studying enemy patterns, trying to understand where the fleet would appear and how they would respond. On the third night, the crew gathered on the observation deck. The stars looked calm, like they were pretending the galaxy wasn't full of danger. The crew stood there quietly, each one lost in their own thoughts. Some thought about the people they left behind. Others imagined what might happen if they failed. And some simply wondered how far they had come from the day they boarded what they thought was a doomed ship. The engineer broke the silence. Do you ever think about how strange this is? All of us here, fixing something that was supposed to be useless? The pilot answered with a small smile. Maybe the galaxy doesn't always know what's useless. The communications officer looked down at her hands. Maybe we don't either. The captain watched them all, his thoughts quiet but steady. This ship survived because you made it survive. Whatever happens next, remember that. Another silence followed, but it felt warm this time, like a blanket rather than a weight. The next morning, the alarm rang through the halls. Not because something was wrong, but because everything they predicted had arrived. The enemy fleet appeared on the edge of their sensors. The crew rushed into position, hearts pounding, movements sharp and certain. The captain took his seat in the command chair as the pilot activated the engines. Lights flickered on the control panels, the patched wires glowing like veins feeding power through an old, stubborn body. The engineer's voice echoed through the speakers. Shields online. The communications officer checked frequencies. We're being scanned. The pilot gripped the controls. This is it. The captain kept his voice steady. Let's show them what scrap can do. The ship surged forward, old engines roaring louder than ever. Patched metal plates holding firm, new systems flashing to life like stars being born. The enemy fleet moved in formation, confident in their numbers and advanced technology. They expected a weak target, a cornered crew, a broken ship. They were wrong. The scrap-built warship dove through the first wave like a wild arrow, twisting in ways no enemy vessel could follow. Energy beams cut through space, missing by narrow margins as the ship danced between them. The patched armor absorbed hits that should have broken it. The shields flickered, but held strong. Every part of the ship worked the way the crew hoped it would, even the parts that looked like they shouldn't. The pilot pushed the engines harder, and the ship shot upward in a spiral, catching the enemy off guard. The crew on board worked like a single mind, each one trusting the others completely. They no longer felt like they were fighting alone. They felt like the ship itself was fighting with them. For a moment, it felt like they were unstoppable. And that moment changed everything. The battle had only just begun. But already, the crew felt the weight of what they were facing. The enemy fleet stretched across the darkness like a wide metal wall, each ship glowing with polished armor and advanced weapon systems. Against them, their old patched-up vessel looked small and uneven, like a rough stone thrown at a steel fortress. But the crew did not feel small anymore. After everything they had survived together, they knew strength was not always about size or shine. Inside the ship, the lights flickered again, but this time no one panicked. They had seen worse. The captain calmly called out orders as the pilot twisted the ship into another sharp turn. The enemy beams cut past them, bright streaks of energy that vanished into the cold emptiness behind them. The pilot breathed hard, but stayed focused. They're adjusting their formation. They're trying to surround us. We won't let them, the captain said. Keep moving. Down in the engine room, the engineer worked with two assistants, checking temperature readings and adjusting pressure valves. The old engines groaned like tired animals. But they kept pushing forward with surprising strength. "Hold together," the engineer whispered to the humming machines, as if talking to an old friend. "Just a little more." In the weapons bay, the crew responsible for launching the plasma rounds loaded the next set. The ship didn't have fancy auto-loading systems or fast cool-down cycles like modern warships, but they had learned how to work with what they had. Their hands moved quickly, each motion practiced from long nights of training. One of the crew members wiped sweat from his forehead. "Do you think the enemy expected us to actually fight back this hard?" "No," another replied. "And that's why they're nervous." He wasn't wrong. The enemy fleet had data. They had records. They had intelligence reports. According to everything they knew, this ship should have been a weak and old piece of metal, barely worth noticing. It wasn't supposed to dodge coordinated attacks or strike with such precision. It wasn't supposed to survive half a battle, let alone push back. But here it was, weaving through fire like it had learned how to breathe in battle. The first major hit came on the left side. A burst of energy slammed into the patched armor, shaking the entire ship. The impact knocked several crew members off their seats. Lights dimmed, and a siren blared. The pilot gripped the controls tightly. That one was stronger. The captain steadied himself. "Report." From the lower deck, the engineer responded. "Armor plate 14 is dented, but holding. We'll need to reinforce it soon." "Engines stable?" "Good," the captain said. "We keep going." The ship spun sharply and fired a burst toward the enemy's second row. The blast struck one of the smaller enemy vessels, a clean blow that forced it to drop back out of formation. It didn't destroy the ship, but it made the enemy realize something important. They couldn't ignore this scrap anymore. Inside the command deck, the communications officer stared at her screen, eyes wide. "Their lead ship is broadcasting to the others. They sound uncertain." The captain allowed himself a small breath. Not a smile, not yet, but almost. "Then let's make them more uncertain." For a moment, the crew felt a spark of hope. But hope in space battles rarely lasts long. Another blast struck them, this time from above. The ship trembled violently. Panels fell from the ceiling. A pipe burst near the corridor, spraying steam. The lights went red. The engineer shouted into the comm system. "We've lost the upper shield layer? I need 3 minutes to reroute power." "We don't have 3 minutes," the pilot said. But even as she said it, she tightened her grip and forced the ship into a sudden dive, letting the enemy's next shot miss by just a few meters. The crew held on to whatever they could grab as the ship dropped downward like a stone. Then the pilot pulled it up sharply, leveling them out. The captain steadied himself. "Is everyone all right?" Various voices answered, tired, shaken, but alive. But in the back of the room, a young technician stood up slowly, holding his arm where it had hit a metal corner. He didn't complain. He simply returned to work, checking readings and providing updates. That was how the entire crew operated, now every person doing their part, even when fear tried to crawl into their hearts. The pilot took a sharp breath. "Captain, they're charging their main cannon." That cannon was the one weapon they truly feared. It could tear apart ships much stronger than theirs. If it hit them directly, their journey might end in a single second. The captain looked at the tactical screen. "We need a plan." The communications officer leaned forward. "If we get close enough to their main ship, their own cannon will be too risky for them to fire. They won't shoot if we're right under their nose." The pilot blinked. "So you want us to fly toward the biggest ship they have? The one aiming the strongest weapon at us?" "It's the only way," the captain said. The engineer's voice came through again. "If you can get them to miss even once, I can use that time to reroute the shield system." The captain nodded. "Then we move." The ship turned sharply, and began flying directly toward the enemy's massive command vessel. It was a dangerous move, so dangerous that some enemy captains hesitated, unsure whether the humans were planning a desperate strike or had some hidden strategy. Inside the enemy ship, officers rushed around trying to make sense of the humans' movement. No one expected a damaged scrap ship to advance instead of retreat. On the human ship, the crew felt the tension rise. The engines roared loudly, like they were shouting against the universe. The pilot kept adjusting their angle. Almost within range, almost. The enemy cannon glowed brighter, charging more energy. The communications officer whispered, "Please don't fire." "Not yet." Then, a sudden quiet fell, a strange stillness that lasted only a breath. And in that breath, the enemy hesitated. The humans reached the blind spot under the command vessel. "They can't fire now." The communications officer cried out. The captain pointed forward. "Take us around their central core." The pilot reacted instantly. The ship curved around the enemy vessel, staying dangerously close to the armor. Alarms blared everywhere. The heat from the enemy ship was so strong that it made the metal of their own ship vibrate. But they held position, and the enemy lost their chance to use the main cannon in the engine room. The engineer worked fast, sweat dripping from his face as he rerouted wires and manually reset systems that hadn't been touched in years. Shields coming back in 3, 2, 1. A faint blue shimmer spread across the screens. "We have shields again." The pilot yelled. The crew cheered, but only for a moment. They knew there was still much to do. The pilot continued flying close to the enemy hull, forcing the larger ship to slow down. Smaller enemy ships circled nervously, unsure how to attack without hitting their own ally. The humans used this confusion to strike at key spots, communication nodes, sensor clusters, external weapon mounts. Wasn't enough to destroy the command ship, but it was enough to weaken its control. The captain watched the tactical screen. "They're breaking formation. This is our chance." The pilot pulled the ship away from the massive vessel, and the humans quickly prepared for a second strike. Their ship, despite all the damage and stress, moved with surprising determination, as if proud of its own survival. The engineer spoke softly into the comm. "One more push. That's all we need." The entire crew felt at the possibility of winning, or at least surviving long enough to escape. The enemy ships recovered and began chasing again, but they no longer moved with perfect unity. The humans had planted doubt among them, and doubt was more dangerous than any weapon. Their ship accelerated one final time, heading toward a narrow stretch of open space between two enemy vessels. Energy beams shot past, shaking the ship and jolting the systems. But the pilot held steady. The crew braced themselves. Then, with a powerful burst from the engines, the ship broke through the line. They were out. Behind them, the enemy fleet slowed, confused and disorganized. They wanted to chase, but their formation was broken, and their command ship was still recovering from the unexpected maneuver. The humans kept flying until the stars looked clear again. Only then did the captain finally sit back, letting out a long breath that he had been holding for too long. The crew looked around at each other, exhausted, bruised, covered in dust, but alive. They had survived another impossible fight, and somewhere in the quiet space around them, the old ship hummed proudly, as if saying, "We are not done yet." After escaping the enemy fleet, the ship drifted quietly through open space. For the first time in hours, there were no alarms, no shaking metal, and no bright flashes of incoming fire. Just silence. A warm, peaceful silence that the crew wasn't used to anymore. It almost felt strange, like their bodies expected another explosion at any moment. Inside the command deck, everyone took slow breaths. The lights were dim, the screens flickered softly, and the tired faces of the crew showed a mix of exhaustion and relief. The captain finally stood up from the control chair and looked around at the others. They were covered in dust, some with small cuts, some limping slightly, but every single person was upright. The pilot leaned back in her seat, letting out a deep breath. "I can't believe we made it out," she said quietly. The communications officer nodded. "Honestly, I thought that last cannon shot would finish us." From the engineering channel, a voice replied with a tired laugh. "Same here. But I guess this old ship wasn't ready to give up yet." The captain placed a hand on the console, as if thanking the ship itself. "Let's not forget, we didn't just survive. We held our ground. We fought back." Everyone felt a warm sense of pride at those words. After a moment, the captain continued, "But we can't relax yet. We need to check every part of the ship. We have to know what still works and what doesn't." The crew nodded and quickly went back to work. They moved slowly, but there was no complaining. Each person knew the ship only made it through because they all worked together, and now it needed their care again, not down in the engine room. The engineer and 2 assistants were already busy. They walked around the engine core, checking cracked pipes and overheated cables. The giant machinery still glowed with leftover heat from the battle. Vent fans struggled to cool down the compartments. One of the assistants pointed to a burnt-out connector. If this had failed during the last push, the engine would have shut down completely. The engineer wiped his forehead. "Let's replace it. The captain will want full power before we head back." Another assistant laughed softly. "Do you think anyone will even believe what we did?" The engineer smirked. "Not until they see this ship with their own eyes." While they worked, the rest of the crew spread out across the vessel. The ship had taken heavy damage. Walls were dented, floors were scratched, and cables hung loosely from the ceiling. Some areas smelled like burnt metal. Others were filled with floating dust, but none of it bothered the crew. They had seen this ship at its worst. They remembered the day they were first assigned to it, when it was nothing but a pile of broken parts. Compared to that, this was beautiful. This was life. On the upper decks, 2 technicians worked together to clean up scattered tools. One of them picked up an old wrench, staring at it thoughtfully. "We used this to fix the main coolant pipe during the battle. Without this, the engines would have cooked themselves." The other smiled. "And to think, this wrench was considered trash when we found it." Every corner of the ship held a story now. Not a story about perfect design or expensive technology, but a story about people who refused to give up. Hours passed as the crew repaired what they could. Finally, the captain returned to the command deck and asked for a status update. The engineer appeared on the screen, covered in grease. "Engines stable. Not perfect, but enough to get us back." The pilot stretched her arms. "Navigation systems are working. I tested short-distance drift. We're good." The communications officer added, "I sent a message to the coalition. They replied. They're waiting." The captain nodded slowly. "Then let's go home." As the ship moved through space, the crew gathered near the windows to watch the stars sliding past. The journey back felt longer than usual. Some of them leaned against the walls, trying to rest. Others whispered quietly about the moments they thought would be their last. But slowly, the distant lights of the coalition outpost came into view. When the ship finally entered the docking zone, the crew was surprised to see dozens of ships waiting, not for battle, but for them. Some were coalition patrol vessels. Others were transport carriers and science ships. Even from a distance, it was clear that every ship had turned to face theirs. The pilot blinked. "Are they waiting for us?" The communications officer checked her screen. "Not just waiting. They're recording us, broadcasting our arrival." The captain straightened his uniform as best as he could. "Let's give them a landing they'll remember." As the battered vessel approached the dock, people on the platforms began gathering. Technicians, engineers, soldiers, officers, even civilians, everyone wanted to see the ship that had stood against a full enemy fleet. The docking clamps locked onto the ship with a loud metallic click. The ramp lowered slowly, creaking from battle damage. And then, for the first time since the fight began, the crew stepped out into the open. Silence fell across the platform. People stared at the crew, at their torn clothes, dirty faces, and tired eyes. They looked nothing like heroes. They looked like ordinary workers who had done something extraordinary. Then, one by one, the crowd began to clap. It wasn't a quick applause. It was slow, steady, full of respect. Soon the entire platform echoed with it. Some people even saluted. Others just stood with wide eyes, unable to believe what they were seeing. The captain felt something tighten in his chest. He wasn't used to attention. None of them were. They had always been the team that received leftover tools, old equipment, and forgotten tasks. But now, for the first time, people saw them differently. A coalition officer walked forward and saluted the captain. "Your report said the enemy attacked the frontier system. We expected you to retreat. That ship wasn't built for war." The captain looked back at the battered vessel behind him. "Neither were we," he said softly. "But we learned." The officer smiled. "This ship, how did you manage to make it fight like that?" The engineer stepped forward, wiping his hands on his suit. "We didn't focus on what it couldn't do. We focused on what it could do. And then we pushed that to the limit." A group of alien engineers approached, curiosity on their faces. One of them asked politely, "How did you power your shields after they were destroyed?" "That should be impossible." The communications officer shrugged lightly. "We rerouted energy from spare modules. Honestly, we weren't sure it would work." The aliens exchanged surprised looks. "Humans," one whispered, almost laughing. "Always unpredictable." The crew didn't feel offended. They had heard that joke many times. But this time, it sounded different. It sounded like admiration. Over the next hours, coalition specialists scanned every part of their ship. They took notes, asked questions, and tried to understand how a broken vessel had become so powerful. The humans answered only what they needed to. Some things they kept as quiet victories. Not secrets, just personal memories that belonged only to them and the ship that carried them. Later, the captain walked alone to the hull of the ship. He placed a hand on the metal surface. It was rough and uneven, full of scratches and dents. But to him, it was perfect. Every mark told a chapter of the journey. The pilot joined him, her eyes soft. "She doesn't look like much from the outside." "No," the captain agreed. "But she's stronger than anyone ever expected." A small smile formed on her face. "Just like us." Behind them, the rest of the crew gathered silently. They didn't need a speech. They didn't need medals or rewards. Standing there together, alive, was enough. Finally, the captain turned to them. "We started with scrap," he said. "Metal parts no one wanted. Systems everyone ignored. But we didn't let that define us. We built something new, something powerful. And today, everyone saw it." The crew nodded proudly. The captain continued, "The galaxy will remember this ship, not because it's perfect or advanced,